Grumblog by Garrett. There was once a beautiful land which was terrorized by an evil witch. Her name was Grumblog, and she could not bear anything that was peaceful, happy, or beautiful. It made her boil over with rage. Her eyes would send out showers of red sparks, and thick black smoke would pour from her ears. The people in the village near the forest where she lived were terrified. They thought a volcano was erupting. Grumblog's forest was a dangerous place. People entering it in search of blackberries or wild mushrooms seldom reappeared. So a ripple of fear spread through the village one morning when a really loud and dreadful volcano raged from Grumblog. Was followed by an eerie silence. All the birds stopped singing. Nothing moved except the wind in the trees. The witch had got extremely cross at the sight of a black bird singing to a pair of courting squirrels. She hated anyone to be happy. Spitting with terrible rage, she stirred her cauldron savagely. Then looking up at the cloud of evil-smelling steam, she hissed, "Fur and feather be no more, turned to stone by Grumblog's lore." In that instant, the whole forest fell silent. The villagers were so scared they packed up their things and fled across the hills. In the forest, all the wild creatures had been turned into stone. Tiny statues of mice, rabbits, and deer stood with surprised looks on their faces by the side of the path. When the sound of all the frightened people running away faded, all that could be heard was the wheezing of Grumblog cackling over the success of her spell. It did not take long, however, for Grumblog to discover that she had made a serious mistake. The forest was more beautiful than ever before. Flowers blossomed where the rabbits and deer used to graze, and everything was quiet and peaceful around the witch's dark and gloomy home, where she sat thinking up new ways of making everyone miserable. Grumblog flung down her book of spells in disgust. "This is no good at all," she roared. "Bring me whirlwinds and thunderstorms, typhoons and tornadoes." And she kicked the sleeping cauldron with her boot. But the storm she unleashed made the forest fresher, greener, and lovelier than ever. And as she stomped through the deserted forest and the empty countryside, the cottage gardens with their bright flowers seemed to mock her. Grumblog went purple with rage. Black trails of smoke curled up over the treetops as she marched back to her dark, damp home. Plunging her broomstick into the cauldron, she stirred the magic brew as hard as she could and cursed the flowers with the most fearful spell she knew. "Cottage gardens, hedgerow weeds, live up to your names and deeds." No one knows whether Grumblog actually intended the spell to work out the way it did, but immediately all the plants began to change. Dandelions and tiger lilies turned into real lions and tigers, snarling crossly at each other. elephant grasses grew grayer and fatter until they became a herd of real elephants. The monkey puzzle tree dissolved into a chattering colony of apes. Cows emerged from cowslips, and snapdragons grew into real dragons that set fire to the treetops as they flapped overhead. Then all the plant animals started chasing each other. The elephants stampeded through the cows, the lions and tigers fought the dragons. It was chaos! Grumblog was absolutely delighted. The witch sat back and watched as the animals crashed through the wood, tearing up the grass, burning the leaves, and barking and snarling at each other. She roared with laughter as they fought, and croaked "Bravo!" as they knocked over bushes and fences, broke windows, and generally made a terrible mess.
I win! I win! Oh, the game's over!
Then Grumblog froze with fear, for she suddenly realized that the roar of the dandelions and the wild trumpeting of the elephant grasses were coming closer. The thudding of heavy feet and the crashing of branches got louder and louder. The plant animals were heading straight for her. Grumblog dashed back to her and managed to hide, just as a huge, angry herd of elephants, lions, tigers, and dragons came smashing their way into her clearing, snapping her broomstick underfoot and sending her precious magic cauldron flying. From the moment that the evil-smelling liquid from the broken cauldron sipped into the ground, the forest began to change. Grumblog's wicked spell was broken. And not only that spell, but all the evil spells she had ever done. The stone birds and animals dotted about the forest came to life again and carried on exactly as though nothing had happened, and the plant animals changed back into their true form. Suddenly, the villagers couldn't remember why they had left their beautiful valley. Filled with gladness, they packed their bags again for the journey home. But what they saw when they got there took their breath away. Their lovingly tended gardens lay in ruins, and their favorite flowers were scattered across the countryside. It took them weeks to tidy up the mess. As for Grumblog, no one ever discovered what became of her. Once her magic powers were destroyed, she vanished from the forest forever, leaving the land in peace at last.